these early users like turned around to us and said, hold on a second, why am I having to do this every year? I trust you to get me a great deal. I've done it 3 years in a row now. Can't you just sort this out for me and I don't have to worry about it? And that was kind of the light bulb moment of like, yeah, actually, that's a good point. Like, why aren't we, just doing this for people on an ongoing basis?
Hello and welcome to Energy Unplugged by Aurora. This podcast features various experts from Aurora having in-depth conversations with key industry leaders, policymakers and academics from all over the world. It explores the hottest topics across the energy market and gives a unique perspective on major energy issues.
Welcome to the latest edition of Energy Unplugged. I'm Richard Howard. I'm the Research Director of Aurora Energy Research. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Henry de Zoete, who is co-founder of energy auto switching service Look After My Bills, which was recently sold to the industry giant Go Compare. Prior to that, Henry was working as the special advisor to Michael Gove during his time as the Secretary of State for Education. But as it happens, me and Henry are also mates from university and catch up from time to time. So I thought I'd touch base with Henry on the podcast and find out about his journey and starting the company, appearing on Dragon's Den, the real recent sale process to Go Compare, and what he's planning to do next. Henry, great to have you on the podcast.
It's very, very kind. Thank you. Very nice to join you.
I'm going to go right back to the start, Henry, and I thought it'd be interesting first, actually, to talk about your time working with Michael Gove. So you were the special advisor working in his team, presumably working very closely with him on many of the educational reforms he was involved in his time as Secretary of State for Education. What was that like? What were the highlights?
Yes, so that's right. So I was. I think the ludicrous term for it is SPAD. I was a special advisor to him between 2010 and the end of 2013. So kind of getting on to 4 years. And my kind of career background, I'd done kind of out of university. I'd done kind of think tank stuff. It also in the US as well as in the UK. Only a very, very small thing in the US, and then also some kind of communications work. And I'd done quite a lot of work on education policy. So I was very lucky to be able to join Michael in his team in 2010. And it was great. It was a very, it was a very full-on time. We were working very, very hard and doing a lot. And I think there's, there wasn't an area of the education system that we didn't feel like we could make some change and try and improve things for the better. And the thesis, whether anybody kind of, whether people have lots of different views about what we did and how we did it and stuff, but the thesis was trying to, there was an education system that wasn't working for the poorest children. Kind of did work for those who had money and could go to private school or pay for a nice house in a catchment area of a great state school, but there were just not enough great schools, and so everything we did was just kind of focused around all of that. And it was brilliant to work in that team because Michael was an incredible boss and leader because he kind of knew what he wanted to do, and he was single-minded about doing it, and he took a lot of flack for it.
Some of those reforms didn't go down well with the teachers and the unions, as I recall.
That's exactly right. I think there was a few teaching strikes on our watch, which was obviously kind of disappointing and a little frustrating. But we believe what we were doing was for the best, and I think some of the results of the international league tables and recently and performance and the kind of there are more good or outstanding schools now than there kind of ever has been. I think has shown that a lot of the stuff that we did was moving things in the right direction. But yes, it wasn't without its tough times as well, of course. But I felt very privileged and lucky to have been able to work with him and work with that team in the department. And there was great civil servants in there as well, many of whom I'm, still good friends with.
When I've heard about these special advisor jobs, it sounds like one of the most full-on jobs imaginable. It's probably 24/7. Is that a fair description? And was that part of your reason for moving on to other things in the end?
I think that is a correct description, and they are very, very, very full on jobs. And I was in my kind of early 30s, so I didn't have a young family or anything like that. So quite difficult to do those jobs in those kind of circumstances. And yeah, so I did it kind of near to 4 years. There was definitely an element of burnout in terms of where I'd got to on all of it, and wasn't able to kind of give it as much as I had, potentially been able to do before. But also I was kind of like, I'd done what I felt like quite a big chunk of time, and I wanted to go try something else, and also kind of build something, kind of be able to kind of be, ultimately, Michael's an absolutely, brilliant, lovely guy, so intelligent, and an awesome boss. But fundamentally, the bottom line was that he was in charge, and quite rightly. And I think I wanted to build something where I was in charge, and the responsibility was on me, if you see what I mean. So
yeah, no, sure.
We're probably foolish thought, but that's kind of how I felt it, and what I wanted to do.
Yeah, no, I mean, it must have been a pretty amazing experience. Whenever I've come across Michael, he does seem to be an incredible kind of thinker and reformer, and has actually applied the same sort of ideas and reforms that he did not only in education, but then I came across him a lot when he was working at DEFRA and reforming recycling policy and air pollution and all sorts of other things. So yeah, must have been very interesting. I suppose with you sort of wanting then to go off and do other things and be the leader, that's maybe a good segue into talking about your next move to start The Big Deal, which later became Look After My Bills, as an auto switching service. Can you say a bit more about that? Kind of how did that come about, and what was your motivation for starting The Big Deal initially?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd never done anything in energy, and I certainly didn't know the energy world or energy policy. So it was a slightly kind of weird jump, because the big deal was effectively, was doing collective switching in energy, and the concept was a kind of people power concept. Can we bring people together to get them cheaper deals than they would be able to get on their own? Not just in energy, but also, we were hoped to go into other areas. The concept was kind of broader than just energy, and I think it was also kind of like, some of these markets are broken in the sense that, unless you're really focused on it, it doesn't necessarily the case that everybody's prices go down as there's kind of more competition. And it's a funny one, isn't it? That, like, our view was that we kind of needed to take action to try and fix markets that didn't necessarily work as well as they could, and energy was the kind of obvious one to focus on. And it was, this was back in 2014. The price cap was huge news. Well, it was Miliband saying he was going to.
Yeah,
I think it was around that time.
Yeah, 2013.
And there was exactly. So there was a big kind of like thing on energy, and it was also something where we felt we could make a bit of impact. And we were a tiny little, so I set it up with a really brilliant old friend of mine from university, Will Hodgson. And his background was, I mean, he started off at Deloitte, but then he went and worked for Ethical Consumer. And the idea with The Big Deal was to build a movement of people who were kind of signed up to the concept of people power and collective bargaining, not just in energy, but in lots of different things. And then we could use that to go and get these people cheaper deals and save them money, and at the same time also obviously like kind of build a startup business. And it was very, at the start, it was very, and we didn't have any, we raised a tiny small amount of money, and we didn't take salaries for a little bit, and we didn't have any money to spend on marketing, I think. So it was very focused on campaigning and creating news in the media to try and drive people to the website and get people signed up. And then we would kind of hit the phones and talk to energy companies, go see energy companies and try and negotiate bespoke deals, which we did. Which we did a few times, and we did a big partnership with the Sun newspaper, and we did a mass switch to green energy. The idea was, can we get lots of people together, but bargain en masse and get a really great green energy deal, renewable energy deal that was a bit cheaper. And so we did that and managed to get a great deal with Good Energy, and they knocked some money off their standard tariff, which they'd never had done before, and we got 20,000 people going green. So it was fantastic. But we did that. Gosh, we did the big deal from 2014 to kind of around 2017, and it was great. But we never quite felt we had necessarily solved the consumer problem that we were really trying to solve.
The name of the company changed. It pivoted from being the big deal to look after my bills. And I understand around the same time you were in Silicon Valley, raising funds to sort of grow the business further. Can you just talk me through that period? Like, what was the motivation for the change of tack, and what was the change of focus that you went through?
So the big deal kind of built 2014 to 2017, and it was kind of successful to a degree. It was never kind of like really huge. The team was very small, and we kept it all very lean. I think there was like 4 or 5 of us during that period. But I think the real thing that kind of made us move was that we had been talking to our users, and what we heard was we had people who kind of took special deals with us in 2014, and then the deal would come to an end, and then we'd send them another deal in 2015, and then they would take that, and then we did the same again in 2016. And eventually these early users like turned around to us and said, hold on a second, why am I having to do this every year? I trust you to get me a great deal. I've done it 3 years in a row now. Can't you just sort this out for me and I don't have to worry about it? And that was kind of the light bulb moment of like, yeah, actually, that's a good point. Like, why aren't we, just doing this for people on an ongoing basis? And I think there was also a moment of, I think the brutal truth is that price comparison sites have kind of been going for quite a long time, 20 years. I mean, they first started in kind of the early 2000s, and there's not really been much innovation. There's been, like a bits and pieces and new products on there, but fundamentally a long list of deals that you get shown and you choose one is been what it's been for 20 years. And that's worked brilliantly, and people have built brilliant businesses off it, but it kind of only really serves 20, 25, maybe 30% of people who regularly are on top of all of this stuff. And actually, quite often, those are the people who probably need it least, because they are like most on top of all these things, and they've got their own spreadsheets, and they're switching regularly. And it's the kind of poorest in society and the elderly who don't necessarily switch their energy at all, let alone go on a price comparison site every year to make sure that they don't roll onto a standard variable tariff.
Yeah,
so we thought
that kind of brings me to a thought, which is, it does seem that both with the price comparison websites, but also with what you're doing with Look After My Bills, with auto switching and even with the collective switching, we're kind of still working with the people who are up for switching. They sort of have the technical know-how. They have, they can be bothered to switch in a sense. But I suppose my thought is around whether actually to get your thoughts on, is the market still broken if that's what's happening? So what do we do with the 60, 70, 80% of people who don't switch and are who may be still getting a poor deal from their supplier if they're left on a sort of legacy tariff? Is that where, I mean, Ofgem's answer to that has been to introduce the price cap. But I'd be interested in your views. Did you think that the price cap was needed, and can the sort of collective switching, auto switching, price comparison sites all coexist with that, or are they sort of driving in different directions?
So I think we were the only switching site that was pro the price cap, and a lot of you had a lot of companies coming out and saying this is terrible. You know, it will lead to people won't switch, and the savings are bigger if you switch than if you get protected by the price cap, and therefore, you know, there's a danger that this will be problematic. I mean, I think now we've had the price cap for a while. I think the data shows that switching levels have not gone down. If anything, they've kind of gone up. So therefore, I think those kind of warnings, which I always felt were a little self-interested, perhaps, have not borne out to be correct. You know, do we want to have a price cap forever? No, I don't think so. That's not necessarily an ideal situation. You want to have a market that's working properly, but it hadn't been, and there were too many people being overcharged by hundreds of pounds, and the price cap has gone some way to dealing with that. And I think that's got to be a good thing. Now, I hope in the fullness of time that innovations and changes will see the market working better, and the people who don't switch so often will be switching more, and therefore we don't need a price cap. And you know, I think the big deal in collective switching in general, I think there's a bit of evidence that collective switching in general got to the people who don't switch very often and the more vulnerable, because they felt like it was, you know, safer switching with a big group of people and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's the evidence from Ofgem's own switching stuff, and you know, we certainly saw that in you know, when we looked at our own customer figures about who were we getting to and how we doing that. So we had a beneficial effect there, but you know, it wasn't, you know, we were doing tens of thousands of switches rather than exactly. So we were kind of playing around the edges, whereas Look After My Bills, you know, was like kind of the next step on in that journey. And I think one of the things that kind of appealed to people was, you know, they said, okay, well, I don't want to do this myself. I don't like doing this myself. I'm a bit worried about it, but I'll have, you know, these guys know what they're doing. And, you know, we were very clear about how we would do stuff. And we, you know, tried to be tried to be there for the user as much as possible and all that kind of jazz. And so therefore they were like, okay, well, you know, these guys can kind of do it for me and I trust them to do it. And so we also saw that, you know, getting to those people who don't switch regularly, and also getting to those people who kind of like maybe have switched once in 5 years or something and then couldn't be bothered, but they kind of know switching is not a disaster and all of that kind of jazz. And look After My Bills grew very fast and is on well over 500,000 customers now. And you know, when, you know, I have no doubt that it will go on even further, and auto switching is kind of here to stay. And then I think once you kind of got to a lot of people doing all of that, then you actually are getting to these people who have
the market.
Exactly. And then maybe we don't need the price cap for in the medium term, but you might still need it in the short term, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I wanted to turn to the showbiz part of this story, Henry. And as part of the growth story, you took a somewhat different approach to fundraising by appearing on Dragon's Den, which must have been a pretty amazing experience. What was it like in reality? Like, is everything exactly as it appears on TV, or is this sort of different to actually be there doing it in the flesh? I'd just be super interested to find out what that experience was like.
Well, Richard, I can tell you now that the lift is not a real lift.
Really?
Yes, I'm afraid not. So it's a lift that doesn't go anywhere. You kind of press a button, you walk in. The numbers above you look like you're going up a few floors, and then but you're not actually moving, and then the doors on the other side open and you walk out. So it's not a real lift. But I mean, look, it was an incredible experience, and you know, we were very, very lucky that it turned out so well. You know, we ended up getting the best deal in the history of the show, and I think it still is the best deal to this day. And we were on in kind of 2018. But it's so how does it work? You kind of the dragons don't know anything about you. You beforehand, you walk through the door and you come out the lift, and you literally walk up to them as they're all sitting there, and then you pitch and you do a 2-minute opener, and then they start asking questions, and it's all kind of recorded. And we were filmed for 2.5, nearly 3 hours,
Right.
and then they edit it down.
They pull out the good bits.
They edit it down from what was on the show. So exactly. So we actually ended up going to the wall, which is where you kind of go to the back of the studio and discuss with your founder what the offers. We actually went back to the wall 3 times, and they actually only showed one in the program and all of that. But it was it was an incredible experience. We were very lucky. I think it helped that we were also very lucky earlier in the year because we managed to get into a startup accelerator out in Silicon Valley in San Francisco called Y Combinator, who were the kind of they're perceived as being like the very best startup acceleration. They were the first people to put money into Airbnb, Dropbox, Coinbase, a whole bunch of very, very large companies now. And we were very, very lucky to get into that. And we took some investment from them, and we spent the first kind of few months out in Silicon Valley and pitching investors, and we'd raised a bit of money from US kind of angels and venture capitalists out there, and then we kind of came back and went and pitched the Dragons. So we had been kind of like well drilled, as it were. And in particular, my co-founder, because I had my first child actually during that process. I came back from the US, and my co-founder stayed out there on his own and did did all the hard graft absolutely brilliantly. And he was just superb with the Dragons. But it's very funny watching it like kind of live on Twitter, because watching it and then all seeing on Twitter everybody's going, oh, this dragon hasn't asked this question and they're so stupid and all of this, and I'm like, no, they literally asked us every single question that you can possibly imagine, for 2.5 hours, and then we were very, very lucky to get a deal, which we very nearly walked away from, because we had taken money from US investors at a certain valuation, and the Dragons wanted to come underneath all of that, and so it was a tricky one, but we got there in the end, and it was great.
I know the biggest deal in history of Dragon's Den, as you say. So yeah, it did seem from the show that the Dragons were biting your arm off to get involved. But then I guess from what you've said, compelling pitch and compelling growth story, I think, already to that date. And it was pretty obvious, I think, to see that it could be a really fast growing company. I suppose that takes us to the final part of the story, which is, having done all of that and grown the company a bit further in the meantime, you've now taken the further step to set out to go compare, and gone through the process of that final of your exit from it, in a sense. What was that transition like, from having started this thing, just small number of people and not taking salaries and so on, your initial campaigns, all the way through to actually what was quite a big company, and then selling to a much bigger company and staying on, being involved from their side in overseeing this for the last couple of years? What was that like?
First of all, Go Compare were absolutely superb with us, and always extremely straight about how they did things and what they wanted to do. And they, what was brilliant about it was they really, once they bought us, they basically were like, we're gonna, the aim is to grow this as fast as possible. And we were kind of growing and spending money on marketing that we could never have imagined doing as a startup ourselves, even if we had gone and raised a lot more money. It really was. And we ended up doing TV ads. Admittedly, they were kind of like direct response TV ads, and it was all kind of daytime shows, and we didn't do anything on prime time. But it was, we kind of like the whole thing stepped up a gear, and the team grew a lot. Kind of over to kind of 140 people or whatever it was, and when we sold, we were just 50 or 60, I think it was. So it was it was a brilliant experience in terms of like kind of scaling and learning all of that. I think Go Compare was Go Compare itself has actually now been bought, but it was a publicly listed company, and that has its own kind of like trials and tribulations that you kind of have to go, and hoops and stuff you have to kind of jump through. So I think we were used to moving very, very fast, and as you kind of get bigger, you kind of do slow down a little bit, and when you and particularly in kind of a publicly listed company. So there's definite upsides and some downsides of all it. But I've not got a bad word to say about the team and how we were treated and all of that. So it's been a great experience. And I've got so Future PLC have bought Go Compare, and so it's now part of an even bigger company.
Even bigger group, yeah.
Go Compare was 300, maybe 400 people, and then Future is several thousand. So it's kind of like it's now a completely different kettle of fish than where it was. But I think it makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure it will keep growing extremely fast.
Still a compelling offer, a compelling proposition that it started with. So Henry, we'll get to the final part of the podcast, which we have a segment called Overrated or Underrated, where I'll raise a couple of different ideas, and you can give me sort of short, sharp responses to whether you think the concepts are overrated or underrated.
Okay.
The first one is smart meters.
Incredibly badly rolled out.
Okay.
And unfortunately, I do think smart meters are potentially very important and could be very beneficial. I always had a slight issue with the idea that even with a smart meter, I find it hard to believe that the average person is going to be like looking at this every 5 minutes. I mean, maybe they do when they first get it for 24 hours and 48 hours, whatever it might be. But your average person is not going to be bothered about it. The exciting bit about it is what the tech allows at the back end. And I think that's barely been explored really. And I think it will get very, when all of that kind of gets going, I think there's potential for exciting there. But then it's also about ensuring that people can access it and developers can do stuff with it. And that, to be honest, was, I have nervousness about whether that's actually going to happen or how it will happen. And the rollout so far has not covered anybody in glory. So therefore, it's I don't think, are we even on SMETS 2s now, like for every household? And I mean, like that's the and actually in brutal honesty, it caused people like us a bit of problem, because people would be going like, oh, we'd ask, have you got a smart meter, and they'd go yes, and I say, okay, well, when did you get it installed? Oh, well, it's going to stop working if we switch you. And people are like, oh, well, I don't want that. And it's just like, Jesus, like the whole point of this was to save people money, and it's like stopping people from switching. It's just like this is not great. So that's a very way too long an answer. Apologies.
Lots of complexity there. Let's do another one then. Green tariffs for electricity and gas. Yes,
I mean, definitely good. I think there's obviously a kind of debate about regos and what is. It's fascinating to see kind of old arguments coming back again around like vertical. Yeah, what is a green tariff, regos, but then also, if we don't like regos, then we want vertical integration. But hold on, didn't we say we didn't like vertical? It's just kind of like, oh, where does this end? So it is a tricky one. I have to say, I do think, the kind of boon in green tariffs and energy companies being much more green has been, I think it's fantastic, and I think in many ways, putting aside the ins and outs of regos, is definitely better than nothing, and it has also boosted a lot of people going green. So I think that in general it's been very highly positive.
Brilliant. Well, Henry, we will leave it there. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It sounds like you've been through a fascinating journey growing the business and moving on, and wish you well with whatever it is you decide to do next.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Very kind.
That was Richard Howard, Research Director of Aurora, speaking to Henry de Zoete, co-founder of Look After My Bills. Do keep an eye on our podcast feed for more in-depth conversations with senior members of the energy industry. The best way to do this is to subscribe on whatever platform you use. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.